Recording. Sorry about that. Quick shout out and thanks to the Cap Fed Foundation for making all these retroactive programs possible, as well as the Sharon and David Katzman Fund over at Douglas County Community Foundation. Because without their support, none of this would happen. So we really appreciate that. So with that, I'm going to introduce our fabulous presenter, Steve Wilson, who knows everything and anything about wine. And we'll get started. So take it away, Steve.
All right. Well, so we're gonna visit a place that is pretty cool. And we'll talk about why. There are a lot of reasons why, but we're gonna visit the Baja Peninsula of Mexico. Actually, Baja California is the state in Mexico that we're gonna be visiting. And so I'm gonna do something real quick. We're gonna share. There we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. So, as you can see, we're going to be up in the far left corner of the map. We're about 45 miles south of Tijuana and about 30 miles inland, rough, plus or minus. The Valle de Guadalupe is considered the sort of the Napa Valley of Mexico. It is really a magical sweet spot that a lot of really cool stuff is happening in. And it's been an area that has been, I mean, we've seen wine growing in Mexico as far back as the mid 1500s. So they've got a long tradition. You know, the Spanish conquistadors came in and planted a lot of grapes and set up missions and things like that. So grapes have been in this area for a really long time. In fact, really long, much longer than they have been even in the United States. But as you can see from the map, the 30th parallel is marked out, and that's an interesting thing because really, for the most part, wine grapes will not do well south of the 30th parallel. It gets a little too humid, and grapes don't like humidity. It gets a little too warm, so the acidity in the grapes gets kind of cooked out. But the Valle de Guadalupe is sort of a unique place because it's fairly elevated. Elevation in that area between, say, 800 to 1600 feet above sea level, which is really pretty good. I mean, the higher elevations, if you've ever been to Napa Valley, you're looking the highest mountain in Napa Valley is probably 1800 feet. So you're getting some really good elevation. You're also sandwiched in between the Pacific Ocean on the right and the Gulf of Cortez, the Sea of Cortez on the left. I'm sorry. Let me back that up. Pacific on the left, Gulf of Cortez on the right. So you've got close access to water, which helps moderate temperature. So you get that really, Mediterranean climate. So the days are warm, they're relatively dry. Moisture typically will come in the wintertime when the vines are dormant, and so it doesn't come at a time that's going to ruin harvest. But you get this great moderating temperature, and therefore you actually have this little dot of a sweet spot where, even though it's really close to the 30th parallel, and there, as you can see from this map, there are other wine regions in Mexico that are further south. I will say they are pretty mountainous where they are. I mean, they have significant elevation, and the amount of wine that they produce there is relatively small. The amount of wine that the Baja Peninsula in general produces is around, actually Valle de Guadalupe is Valle de Guadalupe is one of the largest regions in Mexican wine production. 90% of the wine comes from this valley. But so there's a smattering of other wine regions, again, high elevation, very small, very boutique, but this is kind of where much of the best wine is produced, and quantity wise, not that much. I mean, 90% is produced in this region, and they're doing the best estimates I've been able to find somewhere around 1.5 million cases annually, 1.5 to 2 million, depending on the estimates, cases annually, which really sounds like a lot, but it's really not. So that's where we're gonna head. It is what else to say about it? It's fairly, as I said, there's a lot of elevation change. So it starts out close to the ocean, sandy soil, as you might find close to the ocean. And as it climbs into the foothills, you get more decomposed granite, and other things that water, for example, also it becomes a little more hard to come by. But there is some variation in the valley. So here's a shot, and this I picked this because it illustrates kind of one of the important things of wine country wherever it is. Typically when you see pictures of wine country, you see uh mountains, elevation somewhere. You see bodies of water, could be a lake, could be a river, could be an ocean, but those things all bode very well in again cooling down that temperature, keeping the days warm but the nights cool. So what you see here is fog coming in off the ocean, which grapes love fog. It helps cool them down. It limits the amount of sun exposure that they have. So maybe the fog burns off around 9, 10, 11 in the morning, and then they get their daylight, and then it cools down at night. But this is perfect for growing wine grapes. And there you can see kind of how that fog rolls in, stays low, hugs the ground, kind of allows the vines to wake up slowly during the day. But a lot of the region looks like this. It is fairly arid. Well, not fairly. It is very arid. In fact, there's really very little ability to do dry farming here. The irrigation has to occur because there just simply isn't water. As you can see that, it's a very dry space. But grapes like that. They need moisture, but they don't like it in the air. They don't like humidity. And so if you can give the grapes just the amount of water they need, that's kind of ideal. That's really a great way to do it. Let me see what other photos I have here. Oh, so this, and we'll taste. I'm gonna just kind of finish up with the slides, and then we'll move on to tasting. So this, we're gonna taste the white first. We're gonna taste the Sauvignon Blanc first. This is actually Montezanic, the winery that responsible for the rosé. But I kind of wanted to show just the wineries here, really cool, very cool architecture. It does seem sort of desolate, Martian maybe, relative to some other wine regions, but it's a very cool spot, and they're the while they've been making wine in this area for since the mid 1500s, it's really been just since the 70s and 80s that things have ramped up. So most of these wineries are very small, very boutique. There's one or two very large producers, but for the most part, the volume of wine that each winery is making is fairly low, say 50 to 100,000 cases of wine, which is really not that much. But anyway, so this is Montezanic, and then the last shot. So you'll notice a big difference. This is the other region that we'll taste. The rosé, the second wine that we'll taste, comes from Valle de Ojos Negros. So evidently there are two aquifers that when you see them from above, they look like two black eyes. But you can see in this picture a lot more moisture. It's actually a higher elevation. It's further inland from the coast, but about 2,000 feet above sea level here. So, more water. Certainly, they don't have to irrigate as much as Valle de Guadalupe. So it's a more hospitable environment in some respects, but being a cooler environment, it also limits the types of grapes that can be grown well here. So we'll go back. I just wanted to kind of get everybody to see the differences in terrain, because as we always say, wine is made in the vineyard, and seeing where these wines come from, I think is helpful to understanding kind of why they're special. Yeah, so let's start with I'm gonna get out of here, and there we go. So the first wine that we're gonna have is Lomita. It is all Sauvignon Blanc. I'm sorry, 90% Sauvignon Blanc, 10% Colombard. Colombard is a grape that has been grown in Texas and in Texas in California for a very, very long time. In fact, in the 70s and 80s, you often found bulk wine would be, if you bought a large, half gallon of wine, it was probably Colombard. Maybe Gallo produced it. But the varietal has been around for a long time. It makes really nice, bright, acid wines. So the addition of the Colombard to this is really, really nice. But this is so Sauvignon Blanc. It needs an area where it is going to have warm days but cool nights. Has to have cool nights. Acidity. Sauvignon Blanc is a cool climate grape. It doesn't like warm weather. It won't make good wine. They make the wines when it's too warm or sort of flabby. The acidity in the wine disappears. The texture gets very full body. I mean, it really does have kind of a flat profile. But this is cool. I as people were picking up the wines, I did mention, the wines here are on the pricier side relative to what we normally do for our tastings. However, believe it or not, these are some of the best values I've come across. There's a lot of reason for price being high. Number one, it comes down to the quantity that they're making. They're not making much. A lot of the vineyards are, again, boutique. So economy of scale, they can't get it. They're not going to get it probably. They're going to have to pay a little more for producing the wine. The Valle de Guadalupe has also been achieved a lot of success. I mean, again, it's referred to as Mexico's Napa Valley. So you have there's a lot of demand for wines from this region. They also have discovered that because it's close enough to California, many of their vineyard workers are basically seasoned vineyard workers that you would find in Napa, in Sonoma, in Santa Barbara, as vineyard managers. And so they do ask for a little more money for their wages. So labor actually is higher here because it requires really specialized skill. It's a fairly rugged environment. You do have to make sure that your irrigation lines are constantly working. There's a lot of maintenance. So part of the cost associated with the increased costs, I mean, I've seen these are probably the least expensive wines from Mexico that I've come across in 15 years of selling or 15 years of selling wine in city wine market. We used to have a few in Missouri when I worked there, but we just don't see wines from here. They typically are on the higher end, $40 to $50. And I until these wines came along, I really hadn't had my Zen moment with the Mexican wines that we had in the market, that we had access to. So yeah, these are going to be a little more expensive. There is higher labor costs associated relative to other wine regions. Small production, boutique, lots, good reputation. And then lastly, there are tariffs. So when they do come across, when we trade wine with them and they trade wine with us, there is a tax, and that has to obviously be paid for by the importer. So for a lot of reasons, at least the quality Mexican wine that we have access to is not the value stuff. I mean, it's not the, I've not seen a lot of $12 to $15 bottles from Mexico that I've absolutely loved. But anyway, let's taste this Sauvignon Blanc, see what everybody thinks. So it's kind of interesting. Um, and as I was kind of reading up about the region, uh, there, like I said, there is an issue with water and the irrigation that is used, because they are so close to the ocean. And typically you find this, go to Florida, or around the Gulf Coast, you can often taste a little bit of salinity in the water. There's salt close to this water source, so there is going to be a little salinity. I get, and so a lot of these wines, um, be, particularly where they're heavily irrigated, will have a little bit of kind of a salinity to them. And I mean, it's not much, but it's an interesting minerality, that that I think would be attributed to salt in the water that they're using for irrigation. But real bright. I think that um, I didn't like this as chilled as I had it originally. So as it warms up, I've been getting a little bit more. Nice lemon, a little bit apple. Almost, I mean, there is kind of a green grapiness to it. I can't figure out how else to describe it, but um, just really bright. And this would be a wine. I wish we were in Mexico. This would be a wine that would pair beautifully with anything out of the water. So, things that grow together go together, and being as close to the ocean as they are. I mean, this is so about 45 miles south of Tijuana, and then you drive inland. It's also maybe 20 miles ish from Ensenada. So it's close to the region is developing a lot more infrastructure, hotels, there I was looking online. There are even some cool glamping resorts. You can rough it but not. Um it is but yeah, yeah, this with something with some ceviche or some grilled fish would be absolutely wonderful. Does anybody have any questions on the Sauvignon Blanc? Any thoughts?
Any questions or just observations about the wine?
Well, we can double back. Not a
Yeah.
problem. We can double back. So, we're gonna go to now the Montezanic, and this is really I really like this wine. Um, Montezanic's a fairly I mean, the Lomita is a very small winery. Montezanic, as you saw from that slide with their tasting suite, it's a little bit more upscale, a little higher production. You see these wines more in the United States. I mean, the Montezanic gets brought over a lot more than say the Lomita does. But Really beautiful wine. The idea behind this one, they grow Grenache. It's 100% Grenache, and they grow this again in that Valle de Ojos Negros, um, higher elevation. The Grenache likes that. You know, a lot of if you think about Spain and where they grow their Grenache, their Grenache likes this climate as well. And you know, you have to assume that they love Grenache. One of the big Mexican varietals that you'll see a lot is Tempranillo. So you can see their Spanish lineage, you know, traced back through their viticulture. But this Grenache is grown higher elevation for you know cooler climates. They really want to attain, you know, retain the acidity of the grapes and kind of present a wine that's reminiscent of the rosés that you would find, say, in the south of France in Provence. So a wine like this, you know, Grenache is really a you know driven by a lot of red fruits. So you kind of smell strawberries and cherries and maybe some watermelon, but refreshing, juicy, little bit of tartness. There's a little orange on it. It has beautiful color. I really like the color of this wine. I mean, it just says summer all the way.
So what would you pair with this food wise?
Well, I would do the probably the same menu as the Sauvignon Blanc.
Hmm.
Things out of the water, rice dishes, you know, certainly like a paella would be nice. Um, but it's a that bright acidity, you know, salads, lighter proteins, maybe some grilled salmon. It's a very versatile wine because it has that pop of acid. You know, acid is really what brings compatibility with food. That balance. It brings out the food of the flavor of the food. It may accentuate the flavors of the wine more because of that, but yeah, this is just a you know, this is truly a kind of a porch pounder wine. It is, but one that you know with spring, summer, um, fall kind of you know meals. I think probably heavier proteins might you know if you had you know I don't know a beef stew, it might get a little lost. But certainly lighter proteins, charcuterie, definitely by itself. I mean, it's a light wine that doesn't really need much. And you know, it's just kind of that beautiful color, that beautiful refreshment, just, you know, a good excuse to sit and do nothing and just appreciate your wine.
Uh, Jack commented that he did fried shrimp tacos and both were
Mhm.
good with that.
Oh
But he
yeah.
did like the Lomita a little bit more. Jack, feel free to chime in here if you feel like it.
Yeah, I thought it was great with both of them. I'm a big rosé fan, but as far as pairing, I like that. But I would sit on my porch and drink this rosé all
Yeah.
day long,
Yeah.
and
Sounds
Yeah.
great.
I may still do that yet.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I agree that the Lomita has a little more lemon, and you know lemon particularly with shrimp, you know, anything fried, particularly fried things from the water. That lemon just pops
Yeah.
it, and it cuts the fat. It brings out the flavor. Um, yeah, no, shrimp tacos would be, yeah, good for you. Well played. Yeah, chin chin.
So is this, I presume this is served somewhat chilled, or what do you recommend in
Yeah.
terms of temperature?
So yeah, I um. I think I am liking it a little bit warmer again.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, it's weird. Not all wine, you know, because every wine is sort of a unique chemical stew. There really is no, you know, rule that is guaranteed. There's some guidelines, but you know, I think you'll notice when a wine gets too cold, it just kind of closes down. You don't taste much.
Mhm.
When it's too warm, you may notice more alcohol. You may be distracted by pruniness or things that smell warm, and so the cooler temperature does keep some of the background noise kind of under the carpet. But I think this one too, a little bit out of the fridge. I was just looking at it, 12.2% alcohol. Um, that is nuts. We don't, hold on, I just lost myself.
Nope, we see you.
Am I sharing again?
No,
Yeah,
you're
okay.
just there.
Yeah, yeah. All right, there we go.
Yeah.
Um, come on. There we go. Anyway, yeah, 12.2% alcohol. I mean, that is just, I mean, that's perfect. Wine in general has really gotten far boozier than it has been
Mhm.
historically. I mean, wine from Bordeaux, for example, a red wine from Bordeaux, historically was 12.5 to 13.5% alcohol. And these days, 14, 15 is getting more and more common. So I love it when they've really kept the alcohol in check, on this wine, and it allows you to drink more, get less polluted, and taste more of the wine. So that's
So, so why the increase in the alcohol content? Is it just more popular with consumers or?
it's been a number of things. Um, it started out actually, as more popular with
Mm.
consumers. It was big wine reviewers, particularly wine reviewer named Robert Parker, favored bigger, bolder, more kind of, I mean, subtlety was always a thing. I mean, he didn't give up on subtlety, but really there were some, I mean, in Parker's, in the 90s, big boozy bombastic reds, that was his jam. And you noticed that, if somebody reviewed a wine and gave it a high score, obviously that helped with sales. And so wineries were trying to, figure out, well, what, maybe we change our wine. And the tragedy is, in some cases, wine regions that have been making the same wine for hundreds of years were now changing their traditions to meet the expectations of an American wine writer. And that,
Mhm.
I find that sort of offensive, I guess, because it's just, you're destroying, you're altering, you're putting your finger on the scale, you're altering the trajectory of a region in ways that may not be the best. And so one of them, yeah, actually is, wineries wanted to make bigger, sloppier wines because those wines got more attention. Um, and but realistically, there also is the aspect of climate change.
Mhm.
You have to grow a grape. You have to ripen a grape long enough to get the flavors you want. And sometimes that means that your grapes are still generating a lot of sugar. And that's problematic, because ideally you want the grapes to certainly have sugar. You have to ferment the sugar, but you want a fair amount of acidity in the grape, so that you're not having to convert all that sugar into alcohol. And so there are a lot of wineries. I mean, there are even services now, because wineries not wanting to make boozy wines, are making boozy, nature is making boozy wines for them. And so there's services that will actually come to your winery and basically put your wine through a centrifuge that will remove, some of the alcohol, so you can actually spin off an amount of alcohol and get it to the percentage that you want.
Oh.
And it's costly, but it is, sometimes it's the only thing they can do to get the balance that they need. But This one seems like balance was achieved, you know, through nature, because 12.2 is pretty low,
Mhm.
pretty low.
So have you had an opportunity to go to any of these wineries? I'm just
I have not
curious.
actually.
Okay.
The funny thing is the supply of Mexican wine in this area was so low that
Yeah.
I really didn't have an awareness of it. A couple years ago, I started a master's program in wine, and one of the benefits of it would we would have cases of tiny little bottles of wine that we would have to taste blind and make notes and whatnot. And so in one of my classes, I had to study the regions of Mexico's wine regions, and that's where I kind of came to the realization that, you know, just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean it's
Yeah.
not there, you know. And I really am. I mean, it's there's a slide I thought about putting it on, I didn't, but there was a slide that uh that showed kind of the breakdown of grape varietals that are used here, and they really are all over the board. I mean, they do like French grapes because of the increase in interest in since the 70s in Chardonnay and Cabernet. Those varietals are definitely getting more attention, but you see little at like I mean there's some producers that are growing the Italian grape Nebbiolo, and Nebbiolo comes from, you know, the north, like right as the you know, Italy kind of crashes into the Italian and French Alps. I mean, it so it's not something that would have ever arrived here naturally. It definitely had some people you know, responsible for moving it from the Italian Alps to Mexico. But they just have, I mean, there really is, like, they're next to Chardonnay. Their number one white grape is Chenin Blanc. I mean, that's crazy. They grow, as I said, Tempranillo and Grenache and other kind of esoteric Spanish and Portuguese varietals. They grow varietals that are definitively French. I mean, they love Merlot, and they're growing Cabernet, um, Sauvignon Blanc. So it's really kind of an interesting mix, and because the funny thing is, because they don't have any of the kind of the really strong traditions, um, they're perfectly happy to blend them however they want. So,
Mhm.
like, you're seeing wine, you know, wine blends with Nebbiolo and Cab and you know, maybe some Grenache. I mean, just mashups that nobody else would do, and they're doing very successfully. But yeah, cool stuff. I mean, again, it really is, you know, an example where nature's making this wine. It almost shouldn't exist, but because there is that cool region, you know, you got water, you got mountains. There really is just this little sweet spot that shouldn't be there, but is.
That's awesome.
But no,
Oh,
so in answer to your original question, no, I've not been there. I admittedly, I did check this. You know, unfortunately, this part of Mexico, the state of Baja California in
mhm,
Mexico is the State Department, the U.S. State Department will encourage you to reconsider your travel plans
mhm.
uh, to in going to Baja.
Yeah.
So
No,
um,
and Googling it, that's kind of what comes up a lot is people
yeah,
asking,
yeah,
because there are lots of wine tours and
yes,
stuff
yeah.
available, but yeah,
Well,
that
and everybody, I will say, I mean, I through school, I did meet a number of people who had traveled there.
mhm,
They are like, we've never had any problems.
yeah,
There's, you know, there's nothing. I mean, you know, it's always the worst examples that kind of set the tone. Um,
right.
but it is, I mean, it is still um, fairly rural. You know, you will get out into the sticks, and that's kind of one thing they discourage people doing. But I don't know. I would probably do an organized tour. I mean, if somebody else was driving and translating, I probably would feel all right about going.
Yeah.
But
There's a couple of questions in the chat.
yeah.
Cliff says you had mentioned the Mexican temperinos. Can you say a little bit more about them and where they come
Oh,
from?
yeah. It is, again, it's a connection to Mexico's Spanish past, but yeah, Tempranillo is a I have not, unfortunately, I don't have one. I don't have access to one at the moment. Um, but they are they drink, well, it sort of depends. I've tasted them. They drink a little bigger than, say, Tempranillo from like Rioja in like northern Spain. Um, and that's actually kind of one of the funny things about this area. Depending on where you're located, people are growing different things. And for example, Nebbiolo from Italy, is fair. I mean, it's medium plus bodied. It probably has around 14+% alcohol. And it's just tannic as all get out. And the Nebbiolos, some of the Nebbiolos that you'll find, many of the, in fact, the Nebbiolos that you'll find in this region they almost drink like Zinfandel. They're really full bodied. They have a little booze. They're a little boozier. They're opaque purple. The grapes, depending on where they're grown, even within the Valle de Guadalupe, it determines kind of the style. But for the most part, when I was tasting the wines, the ones that I found actually to be the most disappointing were the international varietals, the Cab, the Merlot, the things that the reds. And I won't say, even because Chardonnay, actually, I found some Chardonnay that I really, really love. So I won't even throw that international varietal in with them. But the reds tended to be, the international reds were less interesting. But yeah, the Tempranillo, the red Grenache, the Garnacha, they were just different. I mean, they had the characteristics of the grape, but just a different style. There is also a funny thing, I came across some notes from school, and they're, while again they do grow Nebbiolo, and they've discovered that it's sort of scandalous because wine growers have found that they can make a lot of money selling Nebbiolo, because Nebbiolo from Italy it usually starts around 25 or $30 and it goes up to hundreds. And so they get paid pretty well by selling Nebbiolo. And people have taken bottles of wine and done laboratory tests on them to DNA tests on the varietal, and it turned out it's not Nebbiolo at all. And so some people are very reluctant to having their wines essentially certified that it actually is what the grape that you're getting. I mean, it wasn't like they were adding fake grapes or anything. It was a Nebbiolo. Turned out it wasn't Nebbiolo. It was a sweet grape that is shows up around Venice in Italy, that not really Nebbiolo, but that was the way it was being marketed. So you will actually find some wineries that who are very proud of their Nebbiolo that will actually go forth and say, "Hey, we had it certified. Here's our certification. We're actually selling you the grape we're telling you we're selling you."
A couple new questions, both from Cap Gray. The first one is, tell us about the evolution of the vinification of the Sauvignon Blanc grape. It used to taste so grassy, and now it is a much more sophisticated wine.
Oh, so that's actually an interesting. I mean, that's an interesting question. And the answer is, the grape hasn't changed so much. I mean, there are a lot of things. One is, there are some regions, I mean, we've talked about in the past, for example, the wines of New Zealand. Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, very much a thing these days. And it has a very kind of grapefruity, ruby red grapefruit, white grapefruit edge to it. And the reason that happens is, aside from the climate of the northern tip of the southern island of New Zealand, where much of this comes from, um, is that they were all using the same clone of Sauvignon Blanc. So regions around the world will, and given the way things are, the possibilities of doing this today, they will go to a nursery and they'll say, "Hey, we want to grow this grape, and what should we grow here?" And the nursery, usually these are nurseries that exist in, maybe Bordeaux or in France or Italy or California, where they can consult with experts who are maybe even creating these clones, grafting and creating these clones. And so the Sauvignon Blanc is really, depending on where it's grown, it um put forth flavors and textures and aromas that define that place. For example, um, Napa Valley. Napa Valley, because it has ticked up a couple degrees, um, the Sauvignon Blanc is definitely fuller bodied than it has been in the past. And with that, you get maybe a little bit more apple and pear, and maybe a little bit less lemon and grassiness. But no, the grassiness part of Sauvignon Blanc is part of its kind of makeup. It is again a cool climate grape. And whenever something is cool climate, it's not, it's all the green things. And so grass being green is part of that greenness. The flavor and aroma profiles of Sauvignon Blanc always include green things, cilantro, mint, basil. I mean, all the sweet herbs, tarragon, lime skin. There's so many green things that kind of gooseberry that kind of come out of Sauvignon Blanc. But it really is, kind of where each region is. I mean, I can think of probably 6 different regions that produce Sauvignon Blanc, and in a blind tasting, I think everybody would conclude they were different wines, even though they were all Sauvignon Blanc, just by how they were being made. You asked about vinification. Most Sauvignon Blanc these days is either going to be stainless steel or concrete tank. There are a few producers that will do high end barrel aged Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, for example, Bordeaux Blanc, the white Bordeaux, that does see some barrel age often, but for the most part, most of the stuff most of the Sauvignon Blanc is being kept in stainless steel or concrete to really minimize any other aspect than just the taste of the grape, and that brightness. The other thing is a barrel kind of shaves. Barrel aged Sauvignon Blanc is less edgy, and the market seems to like the edgy wines these days. I mean, New Zealand, for example, is still on a tear, and that style that they make is really kind of that crisp, edgy, bright acid, tart kind of wine.
So
Hopefully,
Cap had,
did that answer the question?
yep, thumbs up, thumbs up. And Cap had a second question, which is, how does a winemaker make a rosé? Is it a blend of white and red wine, or is it made another way?
Yeah. So it can be a blend of white and red. It usually isn't. The way often rosés will be made, so you have that that kind of light salmon color. And what they'll do is they'll pick the red fruit, um, Grenache, Pinot Noir, Malbec, Syrah. I mean, they're all sorts of, certainly Zinfandel, the famous white Zin. They'll pick a red grape, and then they'll usually allow the grape to, the weight of the grape in a tank will crush the grape and bleed out a little bit of juice. And that's usually how rosés are made. They are either, I mean, it's kind of cool. We have technology these days that you can put all the grapes into a big tank and inflate inside the tank a bladder filled with air that it kind of pushes out and smashes the grapes against the side of the tank. And these things are very, very well calibrated. I mean, to the, the degree of pressure that you want. They will say, we're just going to press it very lightly. They don't want to bleed off too much color. I mean, that is part of the rosé, but yeah, in most cases, the rosé is just gravity crushed red fruit that is then the fruit is removed. Sometimes they will use that fruit in production of other wines. They don't, even though it hasn't been completely drained of juice, they will they'll bleed off the it's called saignée, a French term, but they'll bleed off this very lightly colored juice and then ferment it to total dryness, usually in a tank that is refrigerated so that fermentation stays very, very cold. The warmer a fermentation gets, the more of the fruit kind of gets cooked off. So but yeah, most rosés, there are some wines where they literally will blend red and white. But for the vast majority of rosés, they do begin with red grapes and are fermented, depending on how long the winemaker wants the grapes to stay in contact with the juice. There's some wines from the south of France that are, I mean, they almost look like you watered down a red wine because they really have a lot of pigment. But the style of wine is a little fuller bodied rosé, and you notice that in the mouth. The texture is fuller, has a little more alcohol, a little rounder in style, but darker color. So that's the other thing. The longer that the skin stays in contact, the more sugars are going to develop. So you're gonna get less of that crisp, that crunchiness that the wine has.
Yeah, and a little bit of Googling I did before the program on rosés. It talked about how is it right that they're typically aged for a shorter amount of time
Hmm.
than the other kinds of
Yeah.
wine? Okay.
There are some rosés. I mean, some rosés actually are meant to age. Um, they're very rare. And you'll know you're buying one because they're usually pretty expensive. Um, but yes, most rosés. I mean, I won't say what's this 20. I 1 to 2 years from current vintage is usually pretty good. I mean, I would say most of the rosés that we have in the store right now are 23s. We should see 24s from the Southern Hemisphere, probably January-ish, maybe even by Christmas, before Christmas. But yeah, 23 that's fresh. But there's some wine. I mean, there's some rosés that are 21s and 2s that just they still have a lot going on. Usually as they age though, the kind of the brightness fades. And that's, I would say, for me, I think the brightness is part of the joy in it. So yeah, I would say look for rosés that are maybe, ideally 1 year off of the current year. But um, between 1 and 2 years is a good range. In fact, there are some. I know actually there are been some rosés from Provence that we've just switched over to 23. So most of the summer people were drinking 22 vintage on these particular producers' wines, and they were beautiful. They're
Yeah.
showing, no problems. But yeah, I like
So
that brightness.
yeah, it's a good segue because another great question from Cap. Why is Provence so famous for its rosé wines?
It's just that's been their tradition, you know. I mean, it really is. It's so on brand, when you think of Provence, you think of like really good food and gardens and maybe the Mediterranean and beautiful beaches, and that's just all Provence rosé. I mean, it is. I don't know the history of why so much evolved that way, but I just, I mean, every cabana club in the Mediterranean is just murdering bottles of rosé every day during the season. I would imagine that again it Provence has some good regions for growing the grapes. I mean, mountainous foothills kind of things where you can get some, and close to the ocean vineyards where you can grow Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, Sancerre, things like that that would make really nice rosés. I mean, this drinks very much like the styles that you're finding from like Aix-de-Provence, in southern France. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I just, there's so many aspects of Provençal wine that it just seems like I know it wasn't a decision, but it's so on brand. It's like if you're going to the beach, our beautiful beaches, if you're going to stroll through our beautiful gardens and eat our beautiful food, you might as well have our beautiful wine.
Why
I mean,
not? Might as
it's just,
well.
it just completes the package. So yeah.
That's yeah, rosé seem to have a big range of really
Mhm.
great and maybe really not so great. And
Yes. Um, with the explosion of rosé really exploded, 10, 12 years ago. I mean, where it really grabbed on, and it's been going and going and going. And unfortunately, yeah, because there is the demand, there's a lot of stuff where I yeah, it's just not good.
yeah,
Uh, Usually it is um grapes that are being grown in the wrong place. They the to get that balance of fruit and acid, you have to grow the grapes in the right place. And
mhm,
if you get too much fruit and not enough acid, which typically the rosés that I really don't like usually are bulk wines, large production, and they have sort of this fake like watermelon Jolly Rancher kind of very, very, very artificial. I mean, it's not uncommon to taste like watermelon rind in a rosé. Watermelon, I don't know, it shows up in a lot of rosés, in some form. But yeah, some of the worst rosés, they're just thick. They have no balance, and they just have a kind of a cavalcade of definitively artificial flavors. And in some cases they are. Some
yeah,
cases they're being manipulated that way. But yeah, so with the explosion of rosé, there is a lot of rosé that's not that great.
yeah.
But the good thing is there's still an ocean of really good stuff.
And hey, and that's why we have you, so you can point us in the right
Yeah,
direction. Um,
absolutely.
Cliff had another question. Can you compare the Grenache rosés from California and Mexico?
Um, so I would say again, it it depends on where it's grown. Because say like a Grenache rosé from around Santa Barbara, I would say it would be fairly similar to this. Soil wise, you've basically got ancient seabed. You do have the morning fog. So, a rosé Grenache from around Santa Barbara, I think poured with this wine, you would be like they probably are from the same place or a similar growing regions. Um, there are some wines that are say further, like where Paso Robles is, further south, where the fruit is getting a little more ripe, and again, the acid is lower, the alcohol is higher, um, the weight in the mouth is fuller. So it sort of depends. I mean, I rosés definitely should find a home. I mean, the grapes for rosé should find a home close to the water, cool region with some elevation. I mean, that's where it's going to be best. But so yeah, I would say it really depends on where in California those are coming from. But I Santa Barbara, particularly Santa Barbara County, does a lot with Grenache, and I've really, really liked a lot of their stuff. I mean, it definitely Grenache and Syrah most certainly want to grow in the foothills in say Santa Rita Hills rather in Santa Barbara. Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. Any other questions? We're getting pretty close to 6 o'clock, but we can take one more if anybody has anything, or just observations from the wines that we tried today. All right. Well,
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to kind of get people tasting stuff like this. It's funny. We have, being in a college town, we have a lot of uh connections through KU, and one of my regulars, she's a visiting lecturer, is from Mexico, and she came into the store and was elated to see Montezanic in the cooler, and she just walked up and she's like, "Why?" I said, we finally got it, but it is it's very cool. I'm very much into exploring other cultures through their food and wine, and this is just yet another cool chapter.
well, my confession is, although I'm sitting in front of this beautiful scene, I'm really in my office. So Scott Morgan, who is lurking out there, you need to save me a glass of this stuff, because I can't wait to try it. So thank you, as always, to Steve. That was really interesting. A whole new part of the world for us, which is
Yeah,
always so
yeah.
exciting.
Well,
And
I hope at some point we'll be able to taste some reds.
yeah, that sounds great. Our next wine around the world is Thursday, October 10th. So mark your calendars and check your email, and we'll let you know what the wines are that Steve will select for us for that session.
Beautiful.
Great. Well,
Thank you,
hey,
everybody.
thank you.
Be
Have a
safe.
wonderful evening. Take
You
care.
too.
Bye. Thanks.